And welcome in to the Bobby Carpenter Show. Bobby Carpenter Daily, right here each and every day, 12:30. You'll be able to watch us on YouTube, see us on X, be on Bally's each and every single day. And as always, I'm joined by my companion, Mr. Anthony Schlegel. Happy to have him with us as well. Super excited. Big show for us today. Talk a little bit about Ohio State preseason All-Americans. There is a new announcement about one of the primetime games, where that's going to be and what that is ultimately going to look like. And then as well, there's some creative NIL stuff that's happening out in Oklahoma State, and just curious to kind of see where all that is going. Going to be a very, very unique time. So we've got all of that going with it. Plus, we're going to be, like I said, Connor O'Gara is going to be joined as well. We got some player grades, week 0, as we'll kind of get excited and get rolling into that, and some news about Marvin Harrison Jr. We'll try to wrap that all up here for you. But coming out of the gate, there is some big news. And the one thing about Ohio State being partners with Fox that kind of stinks is the fact that they've chosen to make Big Noon their primary time slot, which that's fine. I don't mind it. I love the Michigan game at noon. I think that's properly where it belongs. I think everything should be there. When you start talking about Michigan and Michigan being at noon, that makes a lot of sense to me. But I do enjoy 2 or 3 primetime games throughout the year. I would like to have at least one at home, maybe 2. And now when I'm talking about primetime games, I'm talking about games that justify being on primetime. I'm not talking about making Western Michigan one of those games and trying to jam that in like we're doing week 2 at 7:30. That's not good for anybody. I'd like to have Akron at noon. I'd like to have Marshall at noon. Those are noon quality games. Get a nice 3:30 for Iowa, maybe a 3:30 Nebraska. You know, maybe you could make that Nebraska game a night game. I don't know. But the problem is in the Eastern Seaboard, if Ohio State's playing a big game, Fox is going to try to grab it. They'll get first rights on so many of them, and they're going to take those games and they're going to put them at noon. So understand that. That's Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan, when they've played each other in that little triumvirate, they've all been noon kicks. Now it stinks for Penn State because they lose the ability for their whiteout, which is an unbelievable experience. As Schlegs and I, we can talk about that a little later. But they did make the announcement that the Oregon game, believe that'll be game 5 for Ohio State. There's a bye week in there, so it's really a week 6, but it'll be their second conference game, and that is going to be a evening kick, a 7:30 kick Eastern, making a 3:30 kick local. Schlegs, before we get into this anymore, how was your weekend, or how was your Tuesday, big dog? I mean, we're running around Wednesday morning. I know we got a million things going on.
You know what? Here's the best thing about it, Bob, is that I had an absolutely great Tuesday morning. 1, we got super bumpy at the Armory, trained like a Buckeye. 2, I did a lot of work. 3, I get to do a show with you and Pat. 4, changing lives. 5, I went home and I vegged out. I'm complete exhaustion. Okay. And then I turn on the tube and I'm eating some city barbecue. I just need to feed my body some beef and I actually got the two platter meats, and I just said double brisket. And then I turned on and there was Robin Hood. Now, not the old school Robin Hood, but the newer version one. Who is that?
Kevin Costner?
No, Kevin Costner is the old school one.
I mean, I
don't know why his name escaped me. Gladiator. What are we talking? Russell Crowe. It was a version. And I didn't know, like I hadn't seen that in a long, long time. It was kind of the precursor to when he became Robin the Hood or Robin Hood. Yeah. But then right after it was 300. And I had just sat there and watched 300 for a hot minute. And I'm doing some more work, answering some emails. Next thing I know, it's midnight. And I'm like, damn it, I got to be up at 4:30 in the morning. Why do I do this to myself? But that's what happens. I'm just like in there. You know what? Great freaking Tuesday.
Well, bump it, dude. I'm glad that you did that. You got a chance to watch Robin Hood. You watched all of Gladiator, or did you have to cut it
I watched the whole damn thing. I watched the whole thing. It was on a show. It was like sci-fi or whatever. So yeah. I would do work, press pause, skip the commercials. It was great.
Well, Schlegs, Gladiator is 20 years old. I want you to think about that. Over 20 years old.
It's over. It's in high school when we were in high school.
You know they're coming out with the new one, correct? With Lucius?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's going to be amazing. That's going to be amazing.
I'll never forget, watching it for the first time was remarkable. Russell Crowe does a great job. Joaquin Phoenix, unbelievable villain. I mean, the guy you love to hate in that movie. Such a creep. Plays the villain better than anyone
Oh
you
yeah.
see. He was awesome in that. So he does that villain role really well. And so I guess the new one, which I think Denzel's in as well, it's going to be Lucius as the gladiator, the son, the nephew of Joaquin Phoenix, the grandson of Marcus Aurelius. I think that's kind of the plot line they're going for. So I was super juiced when I see that, but I'll never forget the first time I watched it with my kids. And I was trying to find age appropriate time.
Yeah.
How old do your kids need to be to watch like the Gladiators, the Bravehearts, and not shows where there's like, strong sexual content or there's like drugs or anything. I mean, we're not talking about watching Pulp Fiction. We're just talking slags about good old fashioned liberty and fighting for freedom. And with that, then it comes to violence. I think,
When you, yeah, you told me. I want to hear your take on this.
well, and so, I mean, every man argues with their wife about this. Any dad that's out there is going to be arguing with the kid's mom, like, hey, they're good. They'll be fine. Let them be a dude. My dad, as you know, he's a lover of all movies. I mean, especially Westerns,
Westerns.
like he loved Braveheart, Gladiator. These are all in his bailiwick. So we're watching Gladiator at our house. I want to say RJ is maybe 9, like third grade-ish. Thinking, okay, comes on, it's good. And I'm trying to explain to him the story, like justifying like why all this violent stuff is happening. And with that, we're sitting there going, and it's one of the ones where he's fighting, and he goes, "This is where the tiger pops out." And I'm like, "What?" And sure enough, on cue, the tiger's underneath the Coliseum. Pop out. I go, he goes, "Yeah, we watched this with Grandpa like last year." I'm like, "Of course you did. Why wouldn't you have?" Grandpa thinks everything's age appropriate. He took me to see RoboCop Slags when we were like 6 years old. It was double feature at the drive-in. Told my mom, "Oh yeah, it's good. It's a police movie." So that was going to be all great. So he had that ready to rock, and we've seen all that. So I'm glad you got a chance to watch Gladiator. Hopefully you and like Hunter, Sam get a little family thing. Like I feel that might be a family movie trip. Now all my kids are old enough to understand and see. So I'm going to have to make sure that there's no like inappropriate scenes. But as long as that's the case, I think we're going to be good to go. We can go see Gladiator, the new one. Will that be a family movie for the Schlegels?
Yeah, 100%. And it's kind of as your kids get older, and Hunter is now a senior in high school, we get to like watch shows kind of together. He really liked the show Invincible. It's kind of a cartoon. I'm not really into it, but it's a good show. He and I enjoyed watching that. The Boys, like we started watching that together, which is a little different. And like there's scenes in it that are like, I'm like, hey man, whatever. and it's not like I'm fast forwarding, so I'm just like letting it go. But then it's like, hey, like we definitely say, he's like, Dad, I'll actually send him to movies. So I'll send him to a movie. Like hey, I'm going to go see Wolverine, Deadpool and Wolverine.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, how was that? Is that,
tell him, hey,
like, listen,
how do I get jacked like Hugh Jackman at 55? I mean, is that
no
the
doubt,
goal?
man.
Got to get shredded like that.
That is gold. Like, see how they train? But it was really like, he's like, hey, good movie, not appropriate for Sam. Like that's his take to me. I said, guess what? Great. Appreciate that, bro.
Love it. Little precursor there. Okay. Well, before we got you on here, talking a little bit, we got Connor O'Gara coming up from Saturdays Down South. Tremendous. Locked in on college football Schlegs. Knows as much as you're going to find, especially about the SEC, but he's actually a Northern guy. So we'll get his take on some different games and what's going on. But I was previewing Ohio State, 7:30 out in Autzen, game 5, week 6. They got a bye week there during the non-conference. 7:30. Now it's going to be a 3:30 local kick. So you'll probably get a little darkness at the end. Going to be a hornet's nest. I didn't think it would be big noon because that'd be a 9 a.m. local. I thought they might make it 3:30 and slide in that CBS window, but it's going to be a 7:30 on NBC.
Yeah, not bad. I when I first heard that, I was like, man, 7:30 West Coast time, that's bumpy. But yeah, 3:30 is okay.
It's like, the Buckeyes.
I know. They're the biggest. But but again, you got to remember, as a strength coach, like I automatically go into that mode. When I first just heard 7:30, I was like, is that local? It's not. I'm like looking at it, I'm like, okay, 3:30 is fine, because I'm thinking sleep time, right? Like, what does that look like? Again, now with the Big Ten expansion, playing coast to coast, there's things that we haven't had to do on a week in, week out basis that teams are going to have to start doing. I think there is something said about like Cal is now traveling like, I don't know, 12,000 miles in the year. It might be even more than that. Those are things that you do in the league, and you try to tie them up, because where a team would go play on the West Coast, they would stay a week and play, or you fly to London, right? Like these different schematics, flight time, and what that does to the body, and how do you hydrate them? Do you get these? I forget what the little socks were that you put on. I think they're like butterfly or whatever. You put them on there. They just like stimulate, help circulation. But now we got the Normatec boots and rapid reboot, compression things that you can use on the plane. But that's automatically where I went, because it's all about getting the team ready to go play. I think it's not going to be an issue for the Buckeyes starting at 3:30 local, but something that you always got to take into consideration. And then when you look at like the Big Ten versus even the SEC, they're very localized. Like they're not making these trips. Like the furthest west they go is Texas, and Oklahoma and Texas A&M. Other than that, you're over here in Florida. So it's not that long of a travel. They're more used to that. We're more coast to coast, breadth and girth, Bob, length and girth. Big Ten.
The thing is, like playing at night out there, I mean, they're playing 3:30. It's a 7:30 kick here. So maybe Ryan throws a couple practices in the evening that week to kind of get them prepared, get your body used to functioning at a high level that time. And then the other piece, like that's much easier than conversely, if you have like USC coming out to Penn State or Michigan or Oregon, whatever it is, and they're coming east, you get that thing on a big noon. That's a 9 o'clock start for those guys after travel. That's going to be really bumpy. That'll be rough. I am excited for that to be a night game. I wish the Western Michigan game, that's a noon treatment. I hope Ohio State gets another big night game at home in the shoe conference game, something to watch, whether it's Nebraska, Iowa, not a crazy home slate this year, because Michigan Schlags, that's always a noon kick, as it should be. All right.
Yep.
Let's take a quick break. We got Connor O'Gara coming up here. Saturdays down south, as good a football knowledge as you're going to find. Stay locked in here on the Bobby Carpenter Show.
We were called soft last year. You don't want to be soft, especially when you come to the playoffs. So that's going to be a process throughout this season of establishing us as a harder team here in the.
They're off in the Kentucky Derby as Authentic takes them around the far turn. Tis the Laws making his move now, and they're into the stretch. These two stride for stride. Authentic, tis the Law. Here's the wire. Authentic has won the Kentucky Derby.
I don't buy into this nonsense, this conspiracy nonsense that he's got his money and he's dogging it. That's ridiculous.
All right, now pleased to welcome in our guy, Connor O'Gara from Saturdays Down South. Connor, we're getting ready to head into zero weekend here for college football. Maybe not the best slate of games, but you got to be a little bit excited, right?
I mean, you have to be. You can't go into this day trying to just like pretend that it's week one, because it's not. And let's not do the thing where we build our entire days around it. But you know what? College football being on our TV screen, that's a good thing. And we've been waiting a very long time for it. So will we be dialed into Georgia Tech and Florida State playing out in Dublin? Absolutely, we should be. Or are we going to tune into SMU and Nevada playing at 8 o'clock on CBS Sports Network? Depending on how your bets go, yeah, maybe you will, maybe you won't. But yeah, it's college football on TV, and I'm not going to complain about that.
Hey, Connor, I know you're handling everything down south, and I want to ask you this: Week 1, right? A&M Notre Dame. Am I correct?
Yeah.
And here's the thing, man. Like, can A&M rebound, right? So we had Jimbo and all the money that they were spending on all these kids, and we just saw what that led to. 8-4 underperformed, right? in Texas A&M, like that's a blue blood college, man. Like my wife went there. It's a rocking stadium. Are we going to see A&M come up? Can they potentially beat Notre Dame at home week 1?
They can. I don't think they will. And
Really?
I realize that A&M is, I think, a 3-point favorite now. That
Yeah.
line has moved in favor of the Aggies. College Game Day is going to be in the house for the first time since 2018 when a year one Jimbo Fisher hosted Clemson, a Clemson team that went on to win the national championship going away. I mean, blew out Alabama in that title game. And what I wonder about with this A&M team, which I think is going to be kind of all over the place this year. What I wonder about in that first week is what's it going to look like on the offensive line, protecting Connor Wigman, understanding that this is someone who is playing in his first football game since September. And I love Connor Wigman. I really do. But I do think that it's going to be a little bit of a tougher go for them to be able to consistently get that protection that they need against a year 3 Marcus Freeman defense. And then are they going to be able to kind of show up in those big moments down the stretch? Riley Leonard has played in a lot of football. This reunion with he and Mike Elko is fascinating. I mean, it's a Mike Elko Notre Dame reunion as well. And I do think that Notre Dame is going to be able to make enough plays to win on the road. But much like that 2018 Clemson A&M game, it's kind of a game in which you go, oh, A&M got this like moral victory, and maybe they're going to be able to play with anybody on that schedule.
Do you think Notre Dame's a playoff team this year?
I do. I think they go 11-1. And I think they go 11-1 because the Miami cancellation is really setting up for a favorable Notre Dame schedule. I mean, you guys look up and down. Like, there are not a lot of those games in which you even think to yourself, oh, they're going to be an underdog. Even if Notre Dame isn't much better than what they were last year, this schedule screams 11-1. It just does. And I think they lose to Florida State. I think that ends up being their loss this year. But they're going to have everybody up in arms in this era of the 12-team playoff, wherein the conference title games, obviously you get that automatic bye, and Notre Dame, as long as it's not in the conference, is not going to be eligible to get an automatic bye. But I do think that Riley Leonard, as long as he stays healthy, there's a lot to like with this Notre Dame team against a favorable schedule, and they should be able to reap the benefits of that.
So, Connor, thinking about that, and we had Matt Rule, right? We played Nebraska middle of the season. He was talking about the Big Ten is an NFL caliber of conference, right? It's very similar to the SEC. That's who it is. SEC, Big Ten, talking about 4 teams getting in. I start to look at the quarterbacks, right? Because regardless of what we think, in the NFL, it's a quarterback-driven league. Same thing with college football. Georgia, Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, right? Texas. Jackson Dart up there for the Heisman, 6%. Jalen Milton, Alabama, Brady Cook. If you look at those teams, like, is that really the teams from the SEC that could potentially make that college football playoff? And if so, is it 4? Is it 3? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think the quarterback play coming back in the SEC, even though there isn't that one bona fide, like, there's not a Caleb Williams type coming into this year in the SEC. I think the quarterback depth is why the conference feels like it's going to have 4 teams in the college football playoff. And, the Big Ten, I think, that's going to be the standard for the Big Ten and SEC both, is to have 4 in there. There'll be years in which it feels disappointing to only have 3 in there, and then maybe years in which it feels like, oh, they actually have a lot of depth at the top, and they're going to get 5 teams in there. I think that's going to be the range for those 2 conferences. I will say with Matt Rule, and look, I'm a Big Ten graduate. I went to Indiana. I spent time, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. I spent 2.5 years in Nebraska. I covered Nebraska football as well. When I heard Matt Rule say that, I kind of rolled my eyes. I'll be honest. Like, I get it. If I hear that from Ryan Day, if I hear from James Franklin, if I hear from Kirk Ferentz, I'm on board. I'm actually kind of like, all right, you know what? They have every right to be able to say that. I don't really want to hear it from Matt Rule. Not yet. How about Nebraska beats a top 25 team for the first time in 7 years? How about they get to a bowl game for the first time in 7 years? How about Nebraska actually looks the part against elite competition before it tells me that it knows what the best teams are in this sport? To me, I don't really want to hear that from Matt Rule. And I know there was some pushback from my guy, Paul Feinbaum, amongst others. But yeah, the basic sentiment is okay. I just didn't like where it was coming from.
Yeah, I guess that some of that, Connor, is embedded in the messenger. It's like my kids, I mean, I don't need you to tell me that I'm wrong. Like, if I'm wrong, I know that I'm wrong. I don't need you kind of chiming in on that. Like, you're not the right vehicle to let me know. And maybe Matt Rule, like you said, probably wasn't quite that vehicle. Ryan Day might be the only guy. James Franklin, possibly. How much heat do you think Lincoln Riley is under this year? People have talked a lot about Ryan Day and everything, 3 conference losses, all to Michigan. hasn't won a national championship, been in the playoff, other things. Like there's expectations. Everybody gets that, and everyone knows it. But I look at Lincoln Riley, and he was a coach that took a Heisman Trophy quarterback last year to 7-5. If they can't get the defense figured out anymore, like you can't just be an offensive coordinator, head coach. You've got to deliver wins and you've got to deliver a product.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure on him to show that he's still considered one of the 10 best coaches in the sport, because that is quickly fading. It really is. And finally, I don't know why he reached this point now and not like 2 or 3 years ago, but he realized, you know what, Alex Grinch probably shouldn't be the one running my defense. And credit to Lincoln Riley for finally coming to that realization that everybody's been seeing for a long time. I am fascinated with D'Anton Lynn, who steps in from UCLA after he led a unit that was so unbelievably better than it was the year before. And is that going to be the right hire to propel USC to a place that it couldn't even get to last year? Now, you can, point to not necessarily recruiting particularly well. Did they overpay for a guy like Bear Alexander in the transfer portal last year, come from Georgia? Like, does USC have the right guys to be able to last and endure a Big Ten schedule? I don't know, TBD. But D'Anton Lynn is a guy that's my age. He's 34. He's a rising star in this sport. A guy that if he has a great defense at USC, or even just a good defense, because Lincoln Riley obviously has only had one top 50 unit since he's been a head coach. If he just has a good unit, then Lincoln Riley's going to probably be looking for a new defensive coordinator anyways, because D'Anton Lynn's probably going to get a head coaching job. So that's kind of the challenge year after year for Lincoln Riley, to show he can do more than just develop quarterbacks.
Well,
go ahead, Bob.
Well, with that, I've got this theory I think we've talked about a little bit with our guy Jacob Hester on XM84, where Lincoln Riley wears that visor. Lane Kiffin wears the visor, head ball coach visor guy, like the big brain offensive visor guy. Now, Kirby Smart excluded from that company because he's just got a big noggin, but he's a defensive dude. Like, I feel like maybe you're given a little bit more leeway with this. Is the wonder kid, the offensive wonder kid, like, does he still have that genius, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's still there. I think it's still part of his game. And maybe we're going to see Miller Moss, who is, look, I can't remember who tweeted that out the other day, like the list of Lincoln Riley quarterbacks, and like that Miller Moss was next just because he was named the starter. And I'm like, this guy's not Baker Mayfield. He's not Kyler Murray. He's not Caleb Williams. Like, he's not Jalen Hurts, who obviously wasn't necessarily just Lincoln Riley developed. That actually go back to 2018 with Jalen Hurts and look at the year that he spent working with Dan Enos, who was Alabama's quarterbacks coach at the time. Probably doesn't get enough credit for that, but whatever. Miller Moss is going to be in for a really fascinating year, because if he can also be one of the better quarterbacks in college football, we'll be saying, yeah, Lincoln Riley still got it. This dude is still phenomenal at developing quarterbacks. But there's a reason why this guy hasn't necessarily started. He's in the exact same spot, ironically enough, that his counterpart Garrett Nussmeier's in, where he watched, he stood around and waited behind a guy that was brought in to be able to play ahead of him, a guy who won a Heisman Trophy, just like Jaden Daniels did at LSU. And now it's finally his turn. But what does that look like? I don't know. I think that's going to be really interesting to see. It should be able to probably torch that LSU defense in week 1.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break here. We got more with Connor after the break, talking a little bit of college football playoffs, where the SEC sits, who's going to potentially win that. All that's up here next on the Bobby Carpenter Show.
We were called soft last year. You don't want to be soft, especially when you come to the playoffs. So that's going to be a process throughout this season of establishing us as a harder team here in the
They're off in the Kentucky Derby as Authentic takes them around the far turn. Tis the Laws making his move now, and they're into the stretch. These two stride for stride. Authentic, tis the Law. Here's the wire. Authentic has won the Kentucky
I don't buy into this nonsense, this conspiracy nonsense that he's got his money and he's dogging it. That's ridiculous.
All right, back here on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a like, subscribe, leave some comments. Live every day at 12:30. If you're watching on Bally's, thank you as well. And joined with Connor O'Gara from Saturdays Down South. Grew up in Chicago, now residing, covering the SEC and all things college football. And Connor, I know everybody wants to know who's going to win the conference and down in the SEC. People want to say who's going to win the Big Ten. But I think in a divisionless system now, it's even tougher to say who are the two teams going to be in the conference championship. And so if I ask you that this year for the SEC, where is your lean?
It's a boring answer, but it's Texas and Georgia. I think that's going to be the new rivalry that blooms in this new era of whatever you want to call it, college football expansion, realignment, 12-team playoff. Like, I think Ohio State, Oregon, and Georgia, Texas are the two rivalries that we're going to look at as just fans of this sport and say, man, it's awesome that these teams, I think, are going to play multiple times this year. I actually think Georgia and Texas are going to play 3 times because I have them playing in a national championship as well. So in addition to having that first game in Austin, a game in which F1 is going to be in town, I've already said several times, Georgia fans, you're going to have to take out a second mortgage on your home because of the ticket prices of that game. It's insane. But I do think that those two teams, they are the toughest to find the weaknesses in. And I think Georgia, you could point at, you know what, I don't really like necessarily what they have at corner this year. Maybe, you know what, the pass catching depth, maybe without a Brock Bowers and a Ladd McConkey, maybe that's going to be tough. But then you can always come up with a reason to say they're actually going to be fine. And I think that Georgia goes 11-1 with that lone loss coming in Texas. I think Texas, despite the fact that they've had the 2 running back injuries in fall camp already, I think they go 12-0 in their first year in the SEC. And it's not just a question of do they belong in the SEC? It's can they win the SEC and then some.
Yeah, one, right when you said about the Texas-Georgia rivalry, like coming to a head now in the way that the conferences have expanded, think about that, man. You got that burnt orange and that Longhorn on the white helmet and that red Georgia helmet with the G. Like, that just looks really good. And we talk about that in the Big Ten too, just iconic brands meeting and then playing multiple times. That's absolutely crazy of what you just said about playing 3 times in a national championship. I'm going to ask you this too, because of the way it's set up. Think about this. So let's say you got Texas, Georgia in that game. Whoever wins it, now they get a bye in the college football playoff. And now that other team has to go in and win another game. Like, there's some attrition that happens right there. So is it just more emphasis on actually winning the conference and that's what it does? Or is it just more games? Like, how do you see that conference championship, no division, going into the playoffs looking? And if somebody does lose a conference, can it actually be beneficial to them and where they're seated to make a run in the college football playoff?
It's a great question. And I think the selection committee needs to make a pretty strong statement on that, because if we're going to reward the conference champions, which I'm okay with doing that, with having the first round bye, I think there's still a lot of incentive to play one less football game in a year in which you could be playing 16, 17 games to win a national championship, and how much different that is than even 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I do think that there will be a lot of questions about a team that gets into the college, or that looks like it's going to be in the college football playoff, but then plays in a conference championship game and loses. That's how I have that this year kind of playing out for a team like Utah, who I think by the end of the regular season, everybody's going to be saying, oh, I think Utah is going to win the Big 12 in their first year there. And then I have them losing to Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship. And does a 10-3 Utah team still get into the 12-team playoff? Or because they suffered that third loss, do they get left out and instead another 10-2 team gets put into the field? There are so many of those dynamics that are going to be at play in ways that they weren't in years past. But I'm very interested to see if the selection committee kind of makes a strong stance with that.
That's right. And it's really curious to me, like, if you lose your conference championship and that makes you, 12-1, 11-2, is that better than not having played in it? You get a home game, because that's going to be tough for those teams. Can you imagine, kind of like, you lose, Big Ten champ loses, SEC champ loses, then you have to go on the road and go place and potentially play someone who wasn't as good as you, but since they don't have that extra loss, that's what I'm curious to see how they're going to handle that, because it doesn't really seem fair. Now, I know fair ain't got nothing to do with it, but that's one of the big dynamics that they're going to have to really lay out clearly this year. Because if not, and you don't think you can win that game, set your guys, rest, get healthy and use that last week as a bye, as opposed to ultimately having to play and try to lose and then play back to back.
Yeah, that's what's going to be just so interesting. And especially if you feel like you already have a college football playoff berth pretty much locked in, but you can't be playing in a conference championship and you don't have that potential incentive of the first round bye. Again, I do think the first round bye will fuel a lot of that to, so that we're not questioning motivation in a conference championship setting. As long as that's on the table, I mean, you got to be able to go for it. But maybe like last year where Michigan is playing against an Iowa team that very quickly you realize like Iowa doesn't have a chance. And if Iowa realizes, we're probably still going to make the college football playoff, might as well kind of call off the dogs with this one. Not that they had any dogs on to begin with, but I do think that that's kind of going to be one of these dynamics that we're going to be fascinated to watch play out.
All right, Connor, give me some sleepers. We've been talking about, like, you're infatuated with Texas and Georgia, and I understand why. Give me like a sleeper or two from the Big Ten and SEC that people really aren't talking about.
Okay, I'll go with the ones that I just mentioned there. How about Iowa? Because look, I understand the offense. We could all sleep while watching Iowa, so it's the perfect sleeper team. Look, I think that we all look at the way that last year played out and say, please, Lord, don't put us through that again. That was a disgrace to offensive football. They set offensive football back 200 years, probably. It was that bad. It can't be that bad again. And it can't be that bad again because Brian Ferentz is no longer benefiting from nepotism. We now have a Tim Lester-led Iowa offense with Cade McNamara coming off of injury. It just can't be worse than what it was last year. And even if they don't have a punting extraordinaire like Torrey Taylor, who is now playing for my beloved Chicago Bears, I do feel like Iowa is going to be set up to be able to have more success than people realize. They're top 10 in the country in Bill Connolly's percentage of returning production from a 10-win team. That was the second worst offense in college football and still won 10 games. So I just have a feeling that Iowa's going to be the team that we're not talking about, but they're going to be able to make it into the college football playoff. I actually have them making it instead of Penn State, who I have going 9-3. So that is a little bit of a sleeper. And then I like Oklahoma as well. I think the schedule is really brutal. I think that the year one schedule is so tough. Like if it weren't for Florida, we'd be talking about Oklahoma's schedule is the most difficult in college football. I think it's 6 teams in the SEC who won at least 9 games last year. That's 6 of their 8 SEC opponents, which is just crazy. But I do think that Oklahoma is being slept on because of all the offensive turnover with Dylan Gabriel off to Oregon, with Jeff Lebby taking the Mississippi State job. I think Jackson Arnold's going to be a stud. His pass catchers are phenomenal. Deion Burks is a sleeper player in college football coming over from Purdue. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to become a household name in this sport. And they're going to have a really fun offense pairing with a year 3 Brent Venables defense, which returns a pair of preseason All-Americans with Stutzman and Bowman. So, yeah, I have Oklahoma not quite making the playoff, losing to LSU in the regular season finale and barely missing out at 9-3.
Okay, I was going to say, so then who are your other 2 SEC teams then?
So I have Alabama and Ole Miss, and I have them playing in a first-round playoff game, which would just be fascinating. Like, Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin finally not playing Alabama in the regular season, and then they get them in the college football playoff. And I'm both going 10-2. And I think all the things that have been said about Lane with the way that he's built this roster, I think it's all fair. I love the additions of Walter Nolan, Princely Amonmielen on that defensive line. Like, that's the type of thing you need to do to bridge that gap between yourself and a team like Georgia. I still think Georgia wins that game of the regular season. I think Ole Miss loses at LSU. But then Alabama, I think Alabama has the best offense in the SEC and probably like a top 4 offense in all of college football with Jalen Milroe and Kalen DeBoer, just figuring it out. I have faith in those 2 guys. I think that they're going to gel. It's going to take a little bit, and it might not be the best start, but I do think that those guys, once they find their rhythm, along with Nick Sheridan as the primary play caller, I think it's going to be a fun thing to see.
He is Connor O'Gara. Thank you so much for your time, sir. We really appreciate it. Go check him out Saturday. He's down south, does a tremendous job. Up next, we have our headlines, a unique way to support the Oklahoma State Cowboys via the NIL portal. Find out next here on the Carpenter Show.
Well, how do they know I'm doing this? Did somebody leak this out?
It's social media.
Oh.
It's just that's the way social media works now.
I thought maybe you were just running that yep.
Welcome to Big Play, a sports media team that started back in 2014, and now we're not in a garage. Look at us, incorporating some of Cleveland's favorite sports personalities, bringing you fun and compelling content from downtown Cleveland. Coming to you live from the shores of Lake Erie and Burke Lakefront Airport, join Team Big Play for all the best sports talk in Ohio. Check us out on social media at Big Play, bringing you fun and compelling content from downtown Cleveland.
Anthony Schlegel, just how physical he was. You saw the girth and the power and everything he was bringing to the table, especially when he was a nice beefy 255 playing middle linebacker. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Bobby Carpenter. I want to give a huge thank you and a shout out to Affinity Whole Health, the leaders in the testosterone replacement industry. I've been on a testosterone replacement program for a few years right now, and I've got to tell you, it's been an absolute game changer. Affinity Whole Health has allowed me to be the best version of myself, both mentally and physically. I loved how easy it was to get started. I booked my free consultation, met with my prescriber, checked my numbers, and Affinity Whole Health designed a program that was customized to fit my needs. So I'm telling you guys, if you have low energy, you want to get rid of that spare tire around the waist or take it to the next level in the bedroom, Affinity Whole Health is the place to get started. So don't wait any longer. 5 minutes of your time, book your free consultation. You're going to love the way you feel. Welcome back into the show and headlines. It's brought to you by my friends over at Affinity Whole Health. Affinity Whole Health offers personalized treatment plans to help people feel better, whether you're suffering from sleep loss, you're gaining some weight, you feel like you need a little more energy, you feel like you're just not yourself. They can help you with all of those things. Affinity Whole Health provides expert guidance to support you while safely helping you reach your goals. Like I said, I've been a patient for the last 7 years. They do a tremendous job. They've got Ohio covered, got offices in Cleveland and in Columbus. So go check them out at affinitywholehealth.com and see if they can help you the way they did for me. All right, Schlegs, a couple things here. NIL, big deal. How do you donate money to your school? How do you get involved with players? Well, you know what? We talked about Mike Gundy saying, hey, agents, quit calling. We're done. We're going to play football. This is a great idea. And I was talking to some of the guys over Ohio State. I don't know if the squeeze would be worth the juice to set it all up, but Oklahoma State, as we can throw that tweet up, they're putting QR codes on the back of their helmet, Schlegs. So you know what? You make a big play. You know what you can do? Hey, bam, give me some right here. All right. Point to the back of the helmet, hit it with your phone, shoot $50, $100, whatever it is. Make a big play to win a game, big third down, big sack, whatever it might be. Do you like the idea?
Like this, it's like Bob, I just always remember you just like pumping up the guy. Great story about Bobby Carpenter, by the way. We were in the closed end zone of the shoe, and there literally was a guy. I don't remember the game. I just remember you. Like, these are the comical things that happen while you're playing. And Bob's playing Sam 9 technique, and there's a guy sitting on a chair, and everybody's juiced up, third down. The bells are ringing in Ohio Stadium. Bob's pointing at this guy sitting in this chair like, you stand, like, boom, right? And so, again, that just flashed into my mind as you popped up that on the screen. And I'm thinking, what are guys going to do now? Like, you know, we used to do the Top Gun high five or the purple cobra, right, from dodgeball to each other, like probably some other inappropriate things that you did, Bob. But, like, what are they going to do? Like, point to the back of their helmet? Like, yeah, look at that PBU. Like, I mean, and then what do you got to do? Like, get on the TV and, like, guys standing still and holding his QR code so then you can run up to the screen. I do know this about NIL, and there's a company out there, 5-Star Fans, 5-starfans.com. They're already doing it at Ohio State. It's part of recruiting where you can actually go and donate to that guy's NIL. Like, hey, we want you to be a Buckeye. Here's some cash money. And, like, I know they're doing some cool things, so I'm not going to break the news now, but very, very similar to what this QR code does, but it's better. It's real time. Anyways, that's how it's going. We heard from Ross Bjork, like, if every Buckeye would just donate $1, right, Buckeye fan, potentially 10 million Buckeye fans out there, it's $10 million. And there's pushback from fans like, don't I give enough? Again, you're just looking at all avenues to where you can, like, throw money at that player. Hey, man, it's your money, right? But they're just trying to allocate resources for their guys. So as I always say, charge it to win it, Bob.
Absolutely. Charge it to winning, Schlegs. It's a pretty big deal, pretty beefy deal that's going on there. Ohio State got some All-Americans out there, as they do each and every year. Preseason AP All-American list came out. If we can get that going, it'd be tremendous. But I believe Ohio State led them with 4 All-Americans. They had 2 on offense, 2 on defense. Denzel Burke, Caleb Downs on defense. On offense, Emeka Ibuka, Donovan Jackson. And I believe on second team, they had Travion Henderson as well. So leading the way, I think tied with Georgia with 4. Your kind of thoughts on those guys getting that preseason recognition?
Well, it's great to have preseason recognition, but again, it's preseason. Caleb had a really good quote. They were talking about talent being equated. What does this roster talent look like compared to the SEC? He said better, if not comparable. But he also went into it doesn't matter how much talent you got to go play the games. You got to go execute. And that's what we're seeing through their practice, right? Because you can have a really talented roster and a really terrible culture and bad coaches. You're going to have a terrible team. It's just what's going to happen. So I look at that 4, disappointed. I think people are sleeping on Tyleek, man. Really honestly do. I think Tyleek's going to have a phenomenal year as a defensive tackle. I understand the offensive line. They got to see it. But again, it's just preseason. We threw up that thing about IGB being the lowest ranked pass defender in the secondary. That's just going to be a chip. And so these guys like JT and Jack and Tyleek and guys that didn't get these kind of preseason accolades, that's just another chip, man. If you have nothing to prove, you'll never improve. So you know what? Take that to practice and go freaking dominate, and let's see it on Saturdays.
I think Tyleek was actually second team as well. I'm glad you brought that up. I think he was second team preseason.
He should be.
All-American. So
guys, he's going to be really freaking good. I'm just telling you, man.
Oh, yeah. They've got some studs up front. And like if you're Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, like those guys are going to be fired up. There's plenty of room for guys, like you mentioned, IGB. All of them feel slighted if they're not getting the recognition. Hey, like you said, if you have nothing to prove, you'll never improve. Caleb Downs. I love it. Getting after it. All right, coming up next, we got some questions that got to be answered here. And maybe in the fantasy realm, Marvin Harrison Jr. maybe setting some records here on the fantasy side of things at the next level. Here, check us out on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Stay tuned next.
Well, how do they know I'm doing this? Did somebody leak this out?
It's social media.
Oh.
It's just, that's the way social media works now.
I thought maybe you were just running that yap.
Welcome to Big Play, a sports media team that started back in 2014, and now we're not in a garage. Look at us, incorporating some of Cleveland's favorite sports personalities, bringing you fun and compelling content from downtown Cleveland. Coming to you live from the shores of Lake Erie and Burke Lakefront Airport, join Team Big Play for all the best sports talk in Ohio. Check us out on social media at Big Play, bringing you fun and compelling content from downtown Cleveland.
Anthony Schlegel, just how physical he was. You saw the girth and the power and everything he was bringing to the table, especially when he was a nice beefy 255 playing middle linebacker. All right, Schleg. So for your Ask the Fan segment, a little tailgate talk coming at you. People always want to know, asking about fantasy football. Everyone loves their Buckeyes. Well, Marvin Harrison Jr. getting a lot of traction at the next level. He was drafted out in the Arizona Cardinals, top 5 pick. He's got Kyler Murray as his quarterback. Apparently, Schlegs, he has been the highest drafted rookie wide receiver in the last 20 years when you start compositing his average draft position. Is that any surprise to you with how we watched him play over the last 3 years at Ohio State?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I just remember the Michigan game at home. I don't remember when it was, but I was just listening to fans. I was up somewhere in B, sitting there with my daughter, and some guys are like, just throw it to Marvin Harrison. Like, I'm like, you know what? Pretty good play call. And that's what he does. I mean, you go back and look at that, even that Georgia game where he got knocked out and the penalty that could have been, that wasn't, and whatever the case may be, like, that's a different dynamic. You go back and look at the 2006 national championship, Teddy gets hurt, right? Like in the opening kickoff in that game, right? So those are different. They're difference makers. Like, you got to have them on the field. He's that way. Him being drafted to Arizona makes complete sense. They needed a wide receiver. And again, it goes back to the way that he handles his business on the field, practicing, because I think sometimes we forget all the practice highlights that they showed at Ohio State that also has carried over into all the other guys. Like, and it started from Zone 6, previous Zach Smith, and like those guys and how they work at their craft, and just keeps going down the line, and guys keep showing each other how to do it. He's just, again, he is fanatical about his craft. You take that desire to be great along with great talent, you have products, AKA Marvin Harrison Jr. I think he's going to have a great year. Can Kyler Murray actually see over the offensive lineman to throw him the football? That will be determined. But I think he gives him a chance. And who else do they have down there? The big offensive tackle.
Oh, Paris Johnson.
And first off, again, I just want you guys to know this too. Paris Johnson, phenomenal human, phenomenal worker. The culture that's at Ohio State, they have taken that to Arizona, and it's a difference maker, man. And that's why these pro programs, these pro clubs are looking at the Ohio States of the world, because they're getting pro athletes ready to go.
They want the culture. They want the culture. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We're long. Final break, final segment of the show coming up here on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Welcome back into the program. Before we wrap it up here, big show tomorrow, Schlegs. We've got Chris Plank going to come on. He covers the Oklahoma Sooners out there. Has been super close to the team. We're going to talk a little bit of Heisman odds. Some guys that are on there. Could a Buckeye be near the top? Who's the number one voting favorite for that? And we've got the top 25 programs since 2000 in college football. So we'll get to all that stuff coming up tomorrow. Another big show for you. More big guests coming. We're going to have 2 shows left until we get into a game week. Schlegs, we are just about there. So thank you, folks, for tuning in with us. It's been a wonderful first week. It's hump day. We are halfway through, running downhill. Buckeyes are getting going. We've got a couple of days left. Stay tuned in. Stay locked on here for the Bobby Carpenter Show.